Today, we're going to be exploring a pressing topic, the new recruiting, how companies are adapting for 2021. 2020 has been a year of change, and recruiting teams have been adapting rapidly alongside massive organizational shifts. With these new trends here to stay, how are top companies managing and even thriving within this new normal? We're going to explore how recruiting teams are handling remote work, how they are adapting people and processes to manage powerful new tools and data-driven recruiting, and how recruiters are adapting their techniques to fulfill corporate promises for greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before we dive into this topic, I want to thank our partner, Appcast. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them today. Appcast transforms recruitment marketing by optimizing online job posting programs and helping leading organizations find and hire talent. Since 2014, Appcast has powered 610 million job postings, generated 7.4 billion clicks, 1.2 billion applications, and have managed $600 million in ad spend. Now, a few quick logistical items. This From Day One webinar is being recorded. It's going to be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. So look out for an email about 24 hours from now with that link. That email will also have info on SHRM and PDC credits for this session. And look out for a written account of the conversation next week on our website at fromday1.co. That's FROMDAYONE.co. Around 3 p.m. or in about an hour for those in different time zones, we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I would like to introduce our moderator, the business journalist Lydia Dishman. She reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership. She's written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, the New York Times, and has hosted a lot of webinars for From Day One, and we love her. Thanks so much, Lydia, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you for having me to host this, again, very timely discussion. It feels like things are shifting from day to day, much less week to week. So I feel like we could do a webinar on recruiting almost every week, but that's another issue for another time. One thing that I did want to say was, as in the course of my reporting back in June, not that long ago, I wrote, you know, you're facing an unprecedented economic tsunami when the number of jobs lost in 1 month alone is in the tens of millions. And thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're not only looking at extraordinary loss of life, but the fallout from businesses shuttering across the country and around the world. At that time, though, there were some bright spots, and LinkedIn had reported that there were over 1.5 million entry-level job postings open alone. Fast forward to last month's Bureau of Labor statistic figures, and the unemployment rate had declined to 7.9%, which is yet another bright spot. And it reflects the continued resurgence, if you will, of businesses around the country. And definitely we're seeing gains in leisure and hospitality, in retail, healthcare, of course, and professional and business services. So it looks like we're on the rebound. And here to talk about how we're handling that rebound in terms of adding new people to their organizations are a stellar panel that I have that I'm going to have introduce themselves. And I'd like you each to say briefly what your organization does and tell us about the size of your workforce. Matt, why don't we start with you?
All right, thank you very much. So I work for Party City Holdings, which is the global leader in party supplies. Our organization, right about now spikes to about 22,000 people. So that's what I'm in the midst of hiring today. But every day we have a population of about 5,000 people.
Significant, for sure. And we're going to talk more about adding that many people as rapidly as you have a little bit later in the program. Caroline, why don't you go next?
Hi, it's so great to spend time with you all today. I'm Caroline Dudley. I'm with Accenture. For those of you who aren't familiar with Accenture, we are a large management and technology consulting firm. We have over 500,000 people globally. And one of the things we're spending a lot of time exploring our purpose on is how can we make sure that we think about the power of impact on not just the corporations. We usually work with Fortune 500 companies, but also the broader community, sustainability, et cetera. So I'll really look forward to learning from each of my fellow panelists as we go through this. Thanks, Lydia.
Amazing. Zach, why don't you go next?
Hey, how's it going, everyone? I'm Zach Larson. I'm the Senior Director of HR Shared Services for the Recruitment Center with
I'm not
G4S.
running. Nick, I handed it off because I did something else.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Okay,
you. We're
sorry
just getting some feedback from a mic that isn't muted.
Okay, I'm sorry about that there. G4S is one of the world's leading integrated security providers across the world. So we have 50,000 security officers in the US and around 600,000 security officers across the world.
Significant as well. Janelle, why don't you go next?
Hey, and thank you. I'm excited to be here with all of the panelists. My name is Janelle Washington. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for Stanford Healthcare. We are a large academic healthcare organization located in Palo Alto, California. We have about 16,000 employees that support healthcare in our communities in the Silicon Valley. And we closely align with Stanford University and the School of Medicine. So I'm excited to be here and just hear what other industry is doing. You know, with the pandemic, healthcare has gotten hit really tremendously. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that we do kind of cut across sectors, and Leah, who's last but not least, is got her fingers in many of those pies as well.
I do. Thanks, Lydia. My name is Leah Daniels, and I am the SVP of Strategy for Appcast. And Appcast is an organization that helps many other organizations identify, find, and hire talent. So we work with some of the largest organizations in e-commerce, in healthcare, in retail, you name it. We've probably been doing some work there. And I'm excited just to share a bunch of data that's come out of all of these organizations and how we can leverage that to identify trends and do more productive things in our own workforces. For Appcast, though, we are 160 strong and growing, so we're very small as compared to the folks on this call.
Small but mighty, as they say, correct?
Exactly.
So given the fact that you all have experience across sectors, my first question to all of you is, how radically has recruiting and hiring changed for your company, particularly since March, when most of the quarantine and stay-at-home orders went into effect? So Matt, I'm going to start back with you on this one.
I have no problem leading it off. You know, obviously, you know, we're in a new world, and there was no playbook on how to, you know, execute and navigate through it. You know, first, you know, we went through a furlough process, you know, which was pretty tough, and then we're able to bring everybody back. And in doing so, you know, we had a spike for our seasonal hiring, you know, as mentioned, which is going on right now. And it was all about, you know, speed to hire, but, you know, just making sure that the process was conducive and safe, you know, both for the candidate, you know, and our associates in our stores. So we'll probably hit on, you know, what we did a little bit later, but we leveraged some technology to be able to do so.
Yeah, I'm sure we have a lot to discuss on this. Caroline is nodding her head, so I'm going to ask you to go next. What's changed in recruiting and hiring for you at Accenture?
Well, for us, the biggest change has been around the different business conditions for our clients. We work across sectors. So while we've had some that have been really impacted in a negative way, we've also had a lot that this is their opportunity to step in and be the change that's needed, you know, through the pandemic, through everything that 2020 has brought us. And so for us, you know, we've had continuous hiring. We've had a lot. We're lucky that has already been virtualized. So we were able to bring the key aspects of our experience that we had created in terms of recruiting, really human-centric, but powered by intelligent technology. And we were able to bring that to life fairly quickly. There were some things that we had felt very strongly about needed to be, you know, in person, because that human connection is so very important. So we did, just like everybody, right, go through that evaluation to say, you know, how do we quickly pivot using the tools and the foundation we have to something that still feels very human-centric and feels like brings compassion to the process, but is virtual, because, you know, not only are our new employees and those candidates that we're speaking with going through the same things we all are, right? The thoughts and concerns for our friends, our family, our colleagues in the pandemic and other things through this year. But they're also layering on top the potential of a job transition. And that's a big life change too. So we've really tried to lead with compassion, being underpinned by technology. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of that we doubled down on during this time, is that focus on human compassion and the technology to bring that to life more where we could.
Almost every webinar that I've facilitated, the idea of compassion, of empathy, and also of flexibility has totally risen to the top in terms of what has shifted most radically, regardless of what the topic was.
Right.
So it's great to hear that this theme is consistent. Janelle, you and I had talked earlier about some radical changes that Stanford experienced as well, and especially being in healthcare. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's interesting in healthcare, most of the work that we perform is on site. Most of our employees are frontline or they are delivering care, and that requires you to be physically present. And so with that, most of the support groups behind our frontline workers are physically present just to support our frontline workers. We had to quickly pivot, from the perspective of just how we interview and doing virtual interviews. And most of the interviews that we do in healthcare are consensus driven. So you're going through, various panels and people like to see and touch you and talk to you and make sure that you, can perform, because it's very team-based in terms of how we deliver care. And so, it was interesting how we had to pivot in the matter of a week to 2 weeks. And these are things that we just couldn't figure out how to do over years, right? And we did it in 2 weeks. And so, from the aspect of how do we do virtual interviews and get our leaders just really comfortable with not talking to a healthcare provider or someone that's supporting a healthcare provider in some of our administrative functions, but doing that virtually via video conferencing. And, interesting enough, and I hate to admit this, some of our leaders weren't really comfortable with doing video conferencing because they're so used to doing things face-to-face and that physical interaction. And so we had to stand up our interviewing and our onboarding, so virtual NEOs. And then we had the shift of just a lot of our courts and schools closing down because we're highly regulated. And so we do background checks. And so that information wasn't coming to us as quickly. And we had to work out different strategies there just to get our healthcare workers onboarded timely. And we didn't know what the pandemic was going to bring us because, we were hearing things in other states, how, they're just didn't have enough space and healthcare workers to provide care. And so it was really daunting for us when we initially went into the pandemic just to prepare. And so our teams had to quickly shift on the types of roles that we were recruiting for. So like others, we did a careful analysis of the roles that we were currently focused on and shifted to what were the most critical roles to support COVID. And we did that quickly, and our teams and the entire organization had to pivot quickly. And it was just a rewarding experience to see how quickly people came together for a common goal and to support our communities. And so, it's been something that now we want to continue to make these decisions quickly versus, what happened prior to COVID.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that you're not the first person, a representative from an organization that said, oh, we were working on this for years and we managed to push through this innovation, in weeks. So I feel like necessity is the mother of invention, but it also provides the extraordinarily well-timed kick in the pants that we all need sometimes, yes, despite the fallout of it. Zach, what's shifted over where you are?
It's been an interesting time throughout the pandemic, as well as the the natural disasters that we've had throughout the year and the disruptions in each of the markets, we have opportunities across all 50 states, and we've had plenty of temporary COVID work pop up. So a lot of that started popping up in mid to late March. There were also some of the markets that were shutting down, so we couldn't do a lot of stuff in person that we used to do in person. So we had to make that quick adjustment and pivot to leveraging digital technologies that we hadn't necessarily used to the extent that we could have previously. So we saw our applications drop significantly initially, so we needed to figure out how to continue to drive applicants through our pipeline. So we started to leverage automation for well-timed interactions at each stage of our applicant process. We also leveraged automation to have people select interviews that would automatically populate on our recruiters' Google Calendar. So they would be able to conduct a virtual interview in real time. And then we also leveraged DocuSign and created an internal proprietary software in short time, so a couple of weeks back in March. And when we send out the package for the new hire documents and the new hire is completed and it's signed and sent back, it automatically generates an e-file that's shared with our onboarding and background investigations team. So we made a lot of big changes early on in the process, and we've continued to adapt along the way based on how each geography has changed throughout the pandemic, and each of the municipalities have created new laws and regulations that change the way we may need to conduct business.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a wonk when it comes to the technology behind recruiting, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence. Not so much automation, because automation tools have existed for a while, but I think that the rate of adoption has increased. And Leah, I'm going to ask you about that momentarily. But the other piece of it is that sort of, you know, maybe there was a resistance to using those tools before, and now everyone's scrambling because perhaps this truly is an easier way to get more people, you know, in the talent pool that you're considering, and then also ones that you're ready to hire. So yeah, Leah, I'm going to you. Please make my little data wonk heart happy and tell me what trends. My question for you is slightly different though. What are you seeing companies adopting in terms of tools like what Zach was talking about?
So I have to say first, one of the things I've been most impressed with is not just the rate of change, but the rate at which companies have been able to absorb it and continue to move forward, especially since most people are somewhat change adverse. So if you have to sort of take a big step back and kind of be in awe of the entire recruiting industry and how much change it's absorbed and done in a positive way, right? It hasn't been, you know, no one's been lit on fire and taking the pitchforks out. Most people got on board pretty quick. And I have to say that, like, if you can separate yourself from it, it's very impressive. From a trending perspective, what's interesting to me is you hear a lot of things in the news versus sort of what you see in reality. And for me, part of the news story in this news cycle is about remote work is permanent. This is continuing. And the data isn't supporting that. You know, if I look at the data prior to, let's call it prior to COVID, which for me is March 15th. That's my magic date in the sand. You know, remote work from home, virtual work was about 2 to 3% of overall jobs. And now it's just over 3%. It actually hasn't shifted that much. And I think the sort of takeaway for me on the trend is that companies are still hedging their bets that remote work isn't here to stay. And even if you're going to work remote for today, you might not be working remote tomorrow. And so we're not seeing this drastic shift in organizations saying, recruit anywhere, anyone can work here, it's going to be great. Everybody is still sort of staying close to the vest and home, right? I want to have them be able to come into the office. Another really interesting trend for me, though, has been, you know, we watched this year CARES be introduced, an act that I'm sure impacted you, Matt, and you, Zach, a lot, right? And there were some weeks in early April and May that a lot of companies were looking at us saying, why won't these people call me back or apply for my jobs? And it was really an interesting time where we don't have a lot of past data on what the government, when they intercede this fast and some sort of economic downfall, what the impact is on the candidate market. In fact, we're still seeing the fallout of it, despite the fact that CARES is over, the executive order has come to an end, but schools aren't back in session. And so there's still a group of people who have not re-entered the workforce. I think the last count I saw is about 700,000 women who have not re-entered the workforce. And it's unlikely they will anytime soon. And that's impacting other initiatives that we're seeing, which have become this year a big trend, which is that D&I or the DE&I initiatives that we're seeing. So a lot of interesting things happening around this remote work and companies' adoption of it. But the technology behind it has really been the adoption story, and it's been really impressive.
Yeah, I actually heard a figure that was in the 800,000 range for women who were not going to re-enter the workforce because of the childcare concerns. And as you say, rightly so, that puts a damper on any of those DEI initiatives. How are you going to have equality in the workforce? But I want to kind of shift slightly and talk about how you get the talent pool in. And Matt, I'm going to come to you first again, only because I was so impressed. This man tells us they've managed to bring in 22,000 employees, and you're at 98% of your goal for hiring for the holidays. So, I mean, that's, my head was spinning when I heard this. But was there some different methodology in the way that you sourced these candidates, or was it just wide open?
Well, sure. It sounds like a Herculean effort, but the brand certainly does a lot of the lift. It's just very recognizable. But part of my role is, really develop the strategy and ensure the execution. So, as mentioned, there wasn't a playbook. We knew it would be challenging, to hit our hiring numbers this year, just given the state of everything that's going on. So we had to be strategic, and we were operating with limited budgets this year, probably like many, of us on the call, just because of business. But we went out and, we tried, attract the best talent, leveraging, some job boards. What I really think, helped us get there was, rolling out, a virtual hiring platform, for the candidates, the ease of use, for our stores, speed to hire, and those are two very important, things in my world, to make sure that we hit our numbers. But the feedback was phenomenal from the stores. The feedback from, the candidates, from what I'm hearing, was equally, phenomenal. And yeah, we were able to do it, but it was just, leveraging technology, trying to think outside the box, and, working with some of our key partners, to make sure that we got there.
Lydia, one of the things that I've seen across the board that was interesting from a technology adoption is starting to model, especially in the hourly space, starting to model more of the gig economies approach, where you can front load a good portion of the hiring process through the application, the acceptance, the background check, and even sometimes doing completely touchless and no interview hiring. So the interview actually happens on day one when you show up. And that's the final moment of, yes, you can now start this shift, or no, you can't. And this isn't going to work out for us. And seeing that sort of real-time shift to a model that companies are adopting is really impressive, because it is a different method, right? It breaks a lot of social norms that we have all come to think is how you have to go about hiring people. And with the pandemic, people have realized that you can't do it the way you've always done it. So that particular method I thought was pretty interesting, and is really, if you go through a gig organization's hiring process, it's very similar.
Yeah, one of the other things that we leveraged this year, which super interesting, is there's two things that I look at. There's obviously hires and there's applicants. My role is to make sure that we get enough applicants to the store so the stores can, execute the hires. So we, for the first time, we actually leveraged SMS as a way to, reach out to candidates. And we saw a huge spike, just using our own database, just sending out just a quick message around, about opportunities and, link to apply. We increased our applicants by 500% the day after that we rolled that out. So we didn't want to water it down. So we were strategic of when we rolled those out, but that was something else, new that we did this year. We've done email blasts in the past, which work, and you see a lift, but think about it. You get an email, you probably don't open it, but you get a text message, you always open it at least just to clear it out of there. So that was a big win for us as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, that functionality has been around and I've been reporting on it for years. And the argument was always there that exactly like you said, you're going to look at your phone versus looking at an email. And so that kind of changes the dynamic. But I really think that it took this sort of crisis to enforce the use of it, in a much more significant way. I want to pause briefly here because we are at the top of the hour, and this is about the time we do our station identification. So I'm going to invite Nick to come back on before we proceed with other questions.
Hello, thanks so much. And thanks to everyone who's joined us from Day One webinar today. I'd like to remind everyone that's joining in midstream that we are from Day One. Today, we're exploring the new recruiting, how companies are adapting for 2021. The sponsor today is Appcast. And as a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, including right now. Just look at the bottom of your screen. In your Zoom client, you'll see a little Q&A button down there. If you have any questions whatsoever, we'll answer as many as we can during that Q&A session, which starts in about half an hour. So get your questions in now. And thanks, and back to you, Lydia.
Okay, so I want to dig in more on the sourcing the candidates question. And Caroline, I'd like to start with you on this one. Are you looking in different places to expand the talent pool? How is that working?
Yes, we absolutely are looking in different places to expand the talent pool. The one theme I'm hearing in all of these responses and in talking even before we joined with my colleagues here is candidate experience, right? And what is not just an improvement we can make at one piece of the process, but how can we make sure that candidates have, connection to the company, a seamless experience, and can be moved through to the point of hire at the pace that is authentic to that company's needs and views. And so when we think about sourcing, now that we have even more tools at our disposal in the recruiting tech ecosystem, we're actually able to get a really nice sourcing approach that has a much broader funnel, a much broader starting point than we ever had the human capacity before to go through and spend time with. And so, as I think about sourcing, actually, I'd almost start with a different part in the end-to-end hiring process. I'd almost start at screening and assessments and interviews, because through some of the innovations that we've put in place there to put intelligent technology in our hiring managers' hands and have candidates get to know who we are as a company, we tend to have a longer, more intentional hiring process than other companies do to the type of candidates we generally hire. But we have put that into the assessment process. So because of more of that, not just automation, but because of more of that enablement, we're able to go to more sources. So instead of saying we're going to use the sources we go to as a filter and say, hey, we're only going to hire, for example, from these courses or people who are, employees of these companies, we can actually keep that much bigger. And where that's really important to us is on the purpose of equality. I think all of us, a common theme we all have is that we are in a position of privilege. We're in a position of privilege that we can provide opportunity through the roles that we have at our company. And so with that privilege comes a responsibility to make sure that we are building equality and a diverse slate into that sourcing. And so for us, we have recently released not only our demographics among gender, among ethnicity, But we've also released in the beginning of our fiscal year, just last month in September, we've released goals that we have around ethnicity. We've already stated that we want to get to 50-50 gender parity by 2025, but now we have goals around in the US around both African American and Hispanic American Latinx. And so for us, it's being intentional to make sure that sourcing wise, we're using a diverse slate. How do we do that? And I'll be fairly quick here. A combination of digital sourcing, that ecosystem has blown up. I'm sure my colleagues get 50 notes a day from awesome digital sourcing companies that can find tons of candidates for them. And for us, we want to think about it as an ecosystem we can plug in and plug out as we find sources that are successful. We want to innovate quickly with our sourcing. And so it's a combination of some of those digital sourcing companies that are out there, in addition to long-standing partnerships with certain professional organizations or student organizations. So some examples for us: NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers; SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And there's many others that we have across the board, pride groups that are out there. And so for us, I think it's that combination of the digital technology sourcing, the long-standing relationships. And then I also say on sourcing, we've been able to consider so many more referrals coming in from our people, and we think about that as a great source as well. So those are just a few of the ways that we've felt like we can expand, and we want to make sure that we give that opportunity to have employment for a wider group versus funneling them out before they get there. And I think the key with the sourcing is for us making sure we've got that right diverse slate in advance to make sure that then we're able to bring that to our organization. So hope that hit the sourcing point. I could talk for hours about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are so many facets. Janelle, did you want to add something?
Yeah,
to
Lydia,
that?
I was just going to add, and I totally concur with Carolyn. I think, and I just want to kind of focus on, the diversity component of sourcing. One of the things that, we're really focused on, just similar to what Carolyn just stated, is that we're really trying to focus on a compelling value proposition. And what is it that for diverse groups would attract them to Stanford Healthcare? So why would you want to come to Stanford Healthcare? And are there people at Stanford Healthcare that look like me? And I think when you start really focusing on diversity outreach initiatives and so forth, you really have to have that value proposition dialed in to where it's meaningful and people can align with your mission, vision, and values. And so we're really focused on that in terms of our sourcing. And I'll just pivot just a little bit. It also, what we have on our careers page and where people, spend their time. We are really tracking that information so that we are serving up content that's meaningful, because that also aligns with how people align with our mission, vision, and values and our value proposition. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Janelle,
No, that's
add
helpful.
on to that super
Yeah.
quickly, because I think you just absolutely nailed it. We've talked about becoming the destination of choice for our diverse talent. And as you mentioned, what I talk to my HR and my business partner teams about a lot is, if you have a compelling employee experience and it is absolutely a place where people trust to build their careers, that is the best recruiting tool that I can have. And then making sure, to your point, they're present. So I just wanted to double down on what you said and said that is so important. And that's where it's really neat how recruiting and, even HR partners are working more closely together than ever to build that positive experience end to end. Love it.
Right.
Yes.
Lydia, you'll like this because it's a little data point. I'm fascinated by the candidate experience, and I'm a little bit sad by the fact that depending upon the study you read, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 80% of candidates don't visit your career sites. And it's definitely higher if you're in the professional space and lower if you're in the hourly space. But equally distressing for me is that only 1.5% of job ads actually talk about diversity programs. Lots of them have EEOC statements. Everybody's got that one down. But they're not talking about the inclusive environment that they're building at this organization. And it seems to me as a super lost opportunity for organizations. They talk about their culture, they talk about how great they are in the job ad itself when it reaches a candidate, but they don't talk about that inclusive effort that they're putting forth. And for me, that's just this screaming opportunity that anyone could take away and do something different with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's wasted real estate. And Zach, I wanted to ask you how this relates to the temporary workforce, because you've had such a surge of temporary workers. Can you draw a line there?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a little bit different, I feel, with the hourly workforce. You're trying to drive home your employee value proposition, but it's at a different stage of the applicant journey. So you want to continue to drive them through that journey. So what initially draws them in are those rational facts. So what's the wage level? What's the location? What's my commute time going to be? On the job description itself, you can start to drive some of that employee value proposition and some things that will drive home the diversity and drive home some of those benefits that are available to the associate. But I think it's those well-timed interactions through the automation as well as manually through the outreach from our teams that really drive home those points of what we're trying to build from a culture perspective.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of company mission and values, I mean, certainly your existing workforce is bought into that. So another piece, I think, of this talent pool has to be your current workforce and what positions they could be groomed to move into. So what about that? I mean, are you sourcing internally as heavily as you're sourcing externally? I mean, Matt, this doesn't quite fit with the retail model, but certainly at a management level, you know, you can bring people up into, you know, higher roles. And I'm just curious to ask all of you, as what is the internal picture of recruiting look like?
No, I'll start here, Lydia, because I think healthcare, we have about almost a 50-50 mix in terms of internal versus external hiring. And that consists of people moving within the organization, promoting up. You know, in healthcare, we have, you know, people can join a healthcare organization in a on-call status where they're just as a worker as needed, and they can move up in their hours, or they can actually, you know, gain another skill. And so you can actually be what we would consider a nurse that's like a med-surg nurse, and then you move into a specialty position. So we see a lot of that in healthcare where we retrain some of our staff to pick up different specialty areas, and we really focus on that, especially when you think about the pandemic and you heard probably in the news where there was a shortage of critical care nurses. And so if there's a shortage of critical care nurses and you don't have a shortage in another area, then you have to decide, do I buy the talent or do I develop and build the talent internally? And so that's something that from a healthcare perspective, we've done for a long time. When you think about even in the market when the unemployment rates are low. So prior to COVID, you know, we saw about a 4% unemployment rate. That's even lower for healthcare. So when you think about nursing and some of those roles that are critical, we see about a 1 to 2% unemployment rate. These are roles of individuals that are gainfully employed. So we have to do things to develop talent and repurpose some of the skills that we need internally. So we have a host of training programs. We love to promote from within. On occasion, we do have to buy talent from the external marketplace, but this is something that we typically do in the healthcare industry.
You don't need to wait for me. Someone else wants to jump in on this about grooming internal talent.
Yeah, so we take a similar approach in our organization as well. So we leverage our learning tools that are available to our teams to helps them further develop their skills. I think internally too, we're limited with the amount of overhead that we have across the country. But when an overhead role does become open, the internal employees are the first ones to be aware of those roles. If they've signed up for our internal software, it's called Promote Me. So they'll be notified over their email, as well as have that communication from their frontline supervisor. And I think also with our positions, when you're signing up for Promote Me, you're looking to get exposed to different types of clients and support different types of clients that might need different skills and different skill sets. So it's not necessarily moving up within the organization, but moving laterally, but they're developing their skill sets by doing that too.
I would echo what Janelle said as well, in terms of that being part of our talent strategy as we look at all of the needs and what locations, what skills, industries we have needs, and which ones are increasing in need and which ones are decreasing, and being proactive about new skilling. We have introduced something called technology quotient to all of our people and to our pre-joiners to make sure that there is the ability to reskill in different technologies that have proximity skills. So there's a lot being put around, us using internal talent, but thinking about, the potential career path. Because I think we have great success with our internal candidates who know how to navigate, and we truly believe in the ability to new skill them to achieve more on their career path. So there's a lot of investment being put into making sure that we are not forgetting about our existing employees when we think about, filling roles and things that, gosh, who knows, in a year, there might be new positions that none of us ever dreamed, we'd need based on the pace at which things are changing.
Yeah, one of the things that we do at Party City, big on developmental assignments, our open job percentage, for the field, roughly 800 retail stores is 1%. So one of the things that we've done, especially during, this peak hiring season, is create, certain situations within our stores to allow people to take on additional responsibilities, to give them increased exposure. In turn, helps us, fill some open jobs that we have, and it allows us to kind of see how they perform, during their developmental assignments as well.
You're going to add something, Leah, or no? Okay, that's fine. You looked like you were hitting the unmute button. Okay, so now that we've talked about internal, external sourcing, I want to really understand more about this virtual interview process. I've actually never done a virtual interview myself. But I'm on camera all the time. And one of the things that I can't help but think about is, not only are you not getting the benefit of exchanging what you're supposed to do, the firm handshake, we'll probably never shake hands again, but the whole body language picture changes. You can only see somebody from the waist up. So walk me through this process. Like, how do you assess a candidate when you can't get those visual cues like you used to get? Anybody can start with this one. I'm not going to single you out.
Well, to be honest, I don't think it changes much. Even during an interview, you're still, it's waist up as they're sitting in front of your desk. You're able to read body language. So, and that's the first thing, I was talking to my store leaders about was, did you find it, difficult, making this decision? And they didn't. He said, no, it was seamless. It was just like they were in front of me. I was able to see them. We're able to connect. So at least from my standpoint, there wasn't a huge difference.
One of the things I have.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'll go real quick.
Okay.
One of the things I haven't seen data on yet, but I've heard whisperings of, is that in some ways this has helped, especially the handy able community, who feels that oftentimes they are discriminated against in a face-to-face interview if they're in a wheelchair, or if they use a cane, or if there are other physical attributes that they feel could give them a disadvantage, which would not hurt them in doing the job itself. And I'm happy if someone has data to share that with me, because I've been looking for it. Because I do wonder if in our DE&I journey, if we are actually with this virtual interviewing process, helping at least in that aspect of the process.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to get a data point on that as well. But I do think about it too in terms of the introvert extrovert and who's got the advantage in a more social interaction. You know, being in your home environment is certainly more comfortable if you aren't as easily, you know, able to speak in a social situation. So, you know, your environment is controlled. Maybe you can have prep notes right next to you where you wouldn't be able to have them in a live interview. So anyway, please, anyone else jump in and disabuse me of these notions or reinforce them.
Well, Lydia, I think I'm gonna actually kind of echo what Matt stated. I think it's actually been beneficial to watch people and some of their judgment when they are interviewing by video, whether or not, you know, as we hear most often, people dress from the waist up. I mean, I could be sitting here with my cutoff shorts on and no one would ever know. But it's the decision you make in regards to how you show up in the video interview. And we've seen a host of different things because we hire, you know, from our housekeepers on all the way up to, you know, our C-suite. And so it's been interesting. I could share some, you know, funny stories about, you know, the judgment people make when they are joining these video interviews. We've seen people where they've been in the bed and, you know, they're doing their video interview still sitting in the bed. And so I think that helps us too with the, you know, the decision or the judgment people, their judgment, their thinking in regards to preparing for these video interviews.
I think the other important thing to mention too is that, you know, it certainly improves the show rate. I've heard some different statistics around it, you know, but obviously, you know, it makes it a lot easier, you know, for both parties, you know, to get into one space at one time.
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well, that our show rate improved by about 20% with our hourly workforce within those first couple of months. It started to dip again as more of the states got their unemployment together and started paying out what they should have been paying out previously. But we've experienced some of the same things that Janelle just mentioned as well, where some people don't necessarily use the best judgment when they go into the interviews and they may be in their beds or they may be driving at the same time. And that just shows the engagement that they have in the application process and in the interview itself. And then in addition to that, I think if you're using good performance-based interview questions, you're really understanding their past behavior and how it's going to influence their future behavior. So I don't think that really changes if you're doing it virtually or in person.
One thing we've been able to bring to this process, and this is less on, you know, evaluating a candidate, but more on helping a candidate evaluate us. What has been really improved for us in the virtual world is that we're able to actually get a lot more of our leaders, you know, from across the globe, you know, into some of these sessions as we have candidates who are really trying to get to know who we are as a company. Whereas in, you know, worlds where we're all in person, it would require you hopping on 3 planes and we were never going to get all of our leadership there. But now to be able to have a really easy way for people to spend time with candidates, even if they are, you know, the leader at the top of the house, whether in bigger groups or smaller, more intimate settings. I think that's something that will continue as we proceed and when we're all hopefully back in person, you know, at some point. I do think that connection, even though it's not live and in the same room, has been so powerful for our candidates as they're evaluating us. So that's one positive I'd note from both the interview process as well as, you know, getting to know each other.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and Zach too, talking about, you know, how somebody shows up. This is sort of a new paradigm for evaluating new recruits. And so Go
I
ahead.
was going to mention one other thing that I had forgotten too. So with some of our recs, we do pre-recorded interviews. So the candidates will be able to record their video responses beforehand. And I think that's a pretty good tool too, because you'll be able to share the recorded video responses with any of the hiring managers that would like to have an influence over that particular hiring process. So that's a little bit unique, and it's different than something that we had done previously.
Yeah, I know, is it HireVue that does those type of video interviews where you can record it and you could delete it if you don't like the way that it looks and re-record so that you're presenting your best self?
Yeah, we actually use our UK-based ATS. It's called TriPad, which has many of the same features that HireVue uses, where you're able to receive the responses and then stack rank the candidates and share the responses from there. But it's also interesting, the automation and AI that we use is called Alio, and it was just acquired by HireVue. So I've been doing a little bit of research on that as well.
Yeah, I'm familiar with all of those. But, you know, we're talking about this sort of, you know, subtle and not really quantifiable change in the way that you're assessing these candidates during these interviews. I'm wondering if you have experienced a change in the type of questions you're asking. Has that shifted since the beginning of the pandemic, and certainly since the beginning of this wave of the civil rights movement too, with the emphasis on DEI initiatives? Are there different skills and experiences that you're looking for in a candidate, whether they're going to work remotely or on site?
Well, I've had to do some hiring recently, and I was hiring some more entry-level positions. And one of the things that is interesting is, you know, historically, an entry-level position, you would bring people into an office, they would be surrounded by other people who they could ask questions and they could hear. They could overhear conversations, jump into meetings. And now you really need to look for people who are self-starters, who can, don't need you to push them. Maybe you need to steer a bit. It's a quality that is always important in hiring, but has never been so important as when you're bringing folks into an organization remotely, and they really have to navigate their own way forward through the learning process and while they get themselves onboarded and productive.
Anyone else changing what you're asking or what you're looking for in terms of skills?
Our questions have remained relatively the same, but I think the way that we're evaluating talent and the discussions that we're having regarding making good interview decisions has changed a little bit, because you have so many candidates that, so I think this was the first week since March that there were less than 800,000 unemployment claims in 1 week. So you have people that are coming from different types of industries that may not have the experience in the security industry itself, but they still may be a good fit for the organization and for G4S. So you can ask the consistent performance-based interview questions and the consistent questions that you may have been asking for a certain type of rec or role. But the way that you're evaluating the talent and the way that you're thinking about experience and culture is a little bit different than we were thinking about it 6, 7, 8 months ago. I think we're more open to people coming into the organization and developing them.
Someone else want to add changes?
I would agree with Zachary. I think that, you know, I haven't seen a dramatic shift in the types of questions that we're asking, but I do think that there is more of an evaluation and more discussion on the type of candidate we bring in. And I do think, you know, even when you look at it from the leadership level, and now we have leaders that traditionally haven't managed you know, employees remotely or virtually or across, you know, different geographies. And this is a new phenomena. And so, you know, we also have to make sure that we're bringing in leaders, or our leaders are developed to where they can manage and keep employees engaged that are not physically there with them. So, you know, I haven't really seen a shift in the types of questions, but just in the evaluation process.
Yeah, and I'm also curious about, you know, Leah, you said you know, the brave new world may not include remote work the way that some people are saying that it's here to stay. But for those who are hiring positions that can be, you know, dealt with from home, are there different skills and abilities that you would look for in a candidate that you never really had to think about before?
Well, Lydia, if I could just answer that question, and I may be pivoting a little bit and maybe not answering it directly the way that you just posed it. But I do think that, you know, and I understand that there's metrics that, you know, remote work may not be here to stay. But I kind of think that, you know, there will, in healthcare at least, we are looking at more opportunities to enable a more remote workforce. And I think, you know, when you look at some of the, you know, some of the things that are happening, and I've heard it through some of, you know, with throughout healthcare, that, you know, more of the non-frontline facing positions are moving to, you know, working remotely indefinitely. And so there's a big push, and it's tied into our real estate strategy. And it's tied into the ability to incorporate our diversity outreach strategy. We're going where, you know, diverse talent is. So when you look at from a tech perspective, you know, tech talent, you know, for Blacks and Latinx may not reside in the Bay Area. So with a remote work strategy, and we want to include more diversity in that workforce, we can push out certain positions remotely, then we can tap into more diverse talent. So I see a shift, at least for us and some other healthcare industries, where we are looking at which roles can remain remote versus coming back on campus post-COVID.
Caroline, did you want to add something? I saw you nodding. I'm wondering if you have different assessments for positions that will remain remote indefinitely.
Yeah, I think this will cause all companies to go through, you know, a workforce review to say what truly needs to be in a specific location. I think, you know, for ours, being in our communities that of the clients that we work with is very important, you know, so we do have, you know, a lot of thoughtfulness about that. You know, to Janelle's point, one of the things that's very important too is making sure we look at the composition of our communities, right? And we are making sure that we are creating a workforce that matches, you know, how that community is composed. And so to your point around, you know, San Francisco or the Bay Area, you know, being underrepresented in certain areas, you know, we are looking location by location and making sure that we've got, you know, the right aspiration in each of our metro markets. In terms of what we might be looking for differently this year, I'd say, you know, for us, I think there's always been the expectation that people can pivot to working virtually or in person, and I think that will remain. I think we will look, you know, position by position to see if there's opportunity, you know, for more virtual work to open it up to a broader, you know, amount of candidates, especially as we talked about earlier, persons with disabilities, you know, maybe from an environment perspective, some of that may be more comfortable for them in a work environment. In terms of things that we continue to progress on, and this isn't necessarily just this year because this is not a new 2020 problem, but we do continue to try to look at the systems we have in place from a hiring and an employee experience perspective every year. And so this year, some of the things that we're looking at too is we've put out new purpose, as we mentioned before, about, you know, where we want to be from an inclusive company, and also being versatile in our skills and continuing to advance and grow and be top technology company. So with that, those are some of the things that we are making sure we're bringing in leaders who share that same mentality, but also that same penchant for action. So we want to bring in people who not only can do the job, but bring with them an engagement that these are the values I have as well. I believe in equality. I believe in, you know, the idea that we can actually change not only our clients' worlds through, you know, technology and human ingenuity, but we can also do that for the community at large. So you ask about, you know, different questions we're asking, and things that we're looking for as we go through the whole evaluation process. Those are some of the things that are top of mind for us this year. And absolutely, it's been influenced by the global pandemic, racial injustice, by what's going on across the world. We also have a new growth model in there. Our CEO, Julie Sweet, was just named about a year ago, and she's brought great change. And so great to see her getting recognition and championing these points. But, you know, we see a continuous shift of the things that we're asking of the people that we hire, both at the leadership level, but also throughout, because we want to see them grow. So a long-winded answer, but not a short change for us.
No, that's totally fine. I'm going to pause momentarily here because we're almost at the place where we take questions from the audience. But first, I'm going to invite Nick back.
Thanks so much. Thank you to everyone who's participating today in the new recruiting, how companies are adapting for 2021 here at From Day One. Thanks again to our sponsor, Appcast. At this time, we're going to be taking some questions from our audience. It looks like we have quite a few, and there's always room for more. So click that Q&A button at the bottom and that now. Thank
you. Okay, yeah, as Nick said, we do have quite a few. We'll try to get to as many as possible, but on the off chance that we are not able to get to your question, something I always like to say, or especially if you have something for a specific panelist, please feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn and ask those questions directly if we don't get to them during the session. Here is one asking, do you see a big, I'm sorry, if an hourly worker, how do you handle or are you concerned for those underrepresented candidates who may not have access to the technology to do an online interview? So Zach, Matt, do you want to take this one on?
Yeah, you can go ahead first, Matt.
No, it's fine. You go.
Okay. Yeah, so that's something that we definitely take into consideration with the virtual interviews itself. So they'll have the ability to schedule the interview itself, and then sometimes they either don't have the data to actually go in and conduct the interview, or they have an older piece of hardware that might not allow them to conduct the interview. So we always take that into consideration. We try and troubleshoot within the first 5 minutes of the interview. If we're still having difficulty from there, we just hop on the phone and conduct a phone interview in the same way we would conduct that virtual interview. So it doesn't limit them at all in that interview space, and then we try to accommodate them as much as possible.
Yeah, I'll echo some of that. The platform, that we utilized, they can certainly use their cell phones, and if they don't have a camera for whatever reason, they weren't required to. We made sure that the stores, had that ability, but it didn't hinder us. When we first rolled this out, we piloted it in 80 stores just to see the ease of use, the feasibility, et cetera. And we had, I think, in the 80 stores, we had an interview day. There's a little over 500 interviews that we conducted during that day, and every single one of them, were virtual like this. So none of them opted to do, just a phone, which, I found surprising. I figured, maybe some people would, but it was interesting.
One thing I forgot to add too, I really pushed for the video interviews to be link-based as opposed to app-based, because when it's app-based, they need to download it, and they might not have the storage capacity for that. So when it's link-based, it's a lot easier. Like Matt was saying, they can access it on any device, any platform, as long as their hardware is up to date. And if they're having the hardware issues, then we try to help them out as much as possible.
Yep, agreed.
Here's another interesting one, and it's interesting to me particularly because I started this discussion with talking about entry-level hires. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to early career hiring? What's working and what have you had to change? So for those entry-level or maybe second year in jobs, who would like to give some insight on that.
I certainly can. So one of the things that we do is, we have, great partnerships, with universities and colleges and, all throughout the country. Obviously intern, programs are key, for building your pipeline. This year was a little bit different. We actually had to postpone our intern program, but what we did do is we still leverage those relationships, with colleges, and it's getting in front of them early. It's letting them know about our brand and educating them on, all the different opportunities, both in corporate and in stores. But I think that's key. If you're gonna, build your bench, you want to get in front of them, as soon as you can. So in my opinion, it's a successful internship program, but also, great relationships, with these colleges. And it's amazing what they'll do for you. If you give them jobs, they'll post it for you. And what a lot of the colleges did in the past, there was interview days, but those turned into virtual interview days, which was, actually more feasible on our end to attend more of them. So it worked out better for us in the long run.
I wanted to go off of that as well. So in addition to the universities and colleges, about 25% of our workforce are veterans. So we work with a lot of transition assistance programs and transition assistance managers at all of the bases and VA hospitals, because that's even though it's not an early stage of their career necessarily, it's a completely different change in their industry, and they're breaking into the civilian workforce. So we try to assist them with that process as much as possible, in addition to working with the other sources such as Handshake and the universities.
And I'll just add, from a healthcare perspective, we have numerous internship and training programs. And remember, we're an academic healthcare institution, so it's very difficult for us to not, train people into healthcare. And so, we saw a continuation of our critical training programs, where we support the schools in terms of people being able to graduate. So they have to do their clinical rotations in the hospital. So we continued that. We just tried to minimize it, so we didn't have as many people training with us. But I will say, from a non-clinical perspective, because we have clinical training programs, we have non-clinical training programs. We have an internship program for some of our finance and administrative functions. And what we did is, instead of those internship positions being, physically on site and working on projects that required them to be physically there, we had a smaller group that did a project virtually, and then they presented that project to our leaders. And so we didn't want to just stop and pause everything. We wanted to continue with some of our commitments. Because, again, this is the start of people's careers, and we just didn't want to have our 2020 cohorts not having the ability to train. And so we just actually pivoted and did some things a little differently this year.
The class of 2020.
Yes. Yes.
That class of 2020.
Yes.
We as well, Janelle, went, we had summer interns that were coming in from all over, and we continued. It was up in the air in March. We were saying, what should we do? We don't, we're not certain, but we went ahead and created a virtual experience that mimicked, as much as we could about, the learning they get, the networking and the sponsorship from folks, as well as just the day-to-day work that they get in projects. And so that actually went really well. And people said that they, unexpectedly got to perhaps even know a broader range of people more deeply than they would have had they been, in an office with a smaller team. So I think that was really positive. Another thing that we do is when we think about hiring at the entry level, we are trying to make sure that for us, skills is our new currency. And so when we look at skills and we look at people, it doesn't necessarily mean you've had a 4-year degree. It means that you've got some of these skills we need, whether they be technology, program management, et cetera, across the board. So we have an apprentice program as well that we have people participate in, and we've been continuing that, where they have a year apprenticeship with us, to build on those skills that they may have gotten and are able to come in. And then for those folks that are coming from more of a campus environment, it's been really neat to see the things that we can do across campuses more with this. So we've done, as we talked about earlier, we've done events that, can actually expose students across the board. And I think the big thing with that entry level group is, as Janelle, as Zach, as others mentioned, meeting those candidates where they are. So Zach mentioned, veteran hiring. We just, reached some of our goals around hiring 5,000 veterans over the past 5 years. And a lot of that has been some of the things that Zach mentioned, making sure that we're tied in with the right Veterans Association, student veterans, et cetera. And so that is quite important to us to make sure that we're not just putting a posting out and waiting for people to come to our postings, but making sure we're building those relationships early and meeting candidates where they truly are in life.
I'm glad you mentioned goals because we do have a question about metrics and goals. Have you had to adjust your metrics and goals in this new era? How do you handle missed or changing goals for recruiting since everything has changed? Who wants to go first on that?
I can talk a little bit about what I've seen across the board. So this has been an interesting time for someone who gets to watch everybody else. There have been a bunch of organizations who were on a roller coaster up as e-commerce really shifted as the new way to shop, and we saw just a huge need for shoppers in last mile delivery people. We saw just a shocking number of critical care nurses and respiratory therapists. So there was a set of organizations who were really, the goals went out the door because everything was about who can I hire right this second, who's breathing and who will show up and will do a decent job, and let's go, 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 go. So there was a whole bunch of that happening. And on the other half, there were a number of organizations who, and I think, Matt, you mentioned this, you guys went through a massive furlough in a matter of minutes, and you watched your organization sort of disappear for a minute. And there were a lot of questions about what's tomorrow and the next week and the week after that going to look like, and how do we keep this business a business so that we can continue to support the families and the humans as part of our organizations. And, we've seen this recovery happen, not as fast as anyone would like, but in some ways very fast as compared to what has, occurred and what we would normally see in a recession of this size and magnitude. And what my sort of experience with a lot of this is the goals stopped being goals as much as they were sort of moving targets for both of these types of organizations, with an understanding that there's some guardrails and that there is a need to keep the business moving forward and to hit the targets that we have in front of us, but that it wasn't a 2020 target anymore. It was an August target or an August of this week target. And those targets really just, it wasn't that the goals changed, but a lot of times the timeframes started changing because there was too much unpredictability to have a clear insight into what the rest of the year would look like. And certainly everybody on this call could tell me that they had something very different that they experienced.
Leah, I won't tell you that I experienced anything differently. I think, again, we kind of relaxed our goals because we were trying to focus on the right things, and there were different programs that we had to stand up pretty quickly. And I didn't want our teams to get focused on the goals, but rather focused on how do we keep, things moving forward. And we were in this stage in March, April, May, where, we put all these positions on pause. So we went, we put 50% of our positions on hold. And we weren't sure if those positions were going to be canceled, if they were coming back. And so then we went through this period where, okay, we got 500 positions that got released all at once. And so, and it was like a start, stop, start, stop. And we just didn't know, how to really anticipate what was going to come next. And so we had to be prepared for that versus focusing so much on the goals. And so we really relaxed them for this year.
One of our goals became agility.
Right.
Right. That will persist. Go ahead, Zach.
That's what I was going. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I was going to mention as well. It does almost change weekly. So I know. I think back in August, the amount of on-premise service jobs within retail and hospitality went up by 79% across all of the job boards. And then recently within the security industry, the jobs on the job boards have gone up by 51%. So you're competing with a lot of different factors. Throughout the pandemic, you're dealing with the pandemic, civil unrest, the CARES Act. Right now, we're going into Q4 and Q1. Are the cases going to spike up across the country? It's looking like it right now. Is the election going to cause any unrest? Are there additional Amazon warehouses getting built in a certain area? I know they're starting to grow a ton during this time period, and they have very competitive wages. So there are a bunch of different factors that are playing into the metrics and goals, and you just need to continually adapt and try and figure out ways to drive the applicant flow into your pipeline. And I think Appcast does a great job of this with other companies, but really using different programmatic solutions to drive people into your pipeline, and then using some of the different outreach campaigns that all of you guys referenced earlier in the call.
That's one thing. So in addition to having exposure to just the way we've done it, we also, have a lot of discussions with our clients about how we can help them with that. And, this year has been like any other in terms of recruiting being a #1 topic among our clients from the board level. And it is exactly what you're mentioning of, in the past, there's never, this is, I hate to use the overused term, unprecedented spikes in needing to hire. And I think what we've all been talking about the importance of that seamless, automated, intelligent end-to-end process, enabling those so that we can be in control of where we get those candidates, the experience they have throughout the interviews and the assessments, and then getting them in the door and feeling like they're part of that company quickly. It's that kind of agility that we're seeing more and more companies say, I need to have this. And maybe I had underinvested in my talent acquisition in previous years because it was always just getting done. Now I see the case for change, that I need to have an investment in this so I have agility, so that my hiring isn't constrained by how many recruiters I have, for example. So we're seeing a lot of digital transformation to enable and empower that agility that businesses need in their ability to grow or react to the market conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one that I've only heard anecdotal evidence to suggest that things are changing. If you're looking to recruit in other states due to remote working, something you wouldn't have done pre-COVID, are you making the salary commensurate with the state the candidate is living in, or based on your HQ where they would have originally been based prior to COVID? Who can enlighten us about this?
I just have a quick response to this. We make it commensurate based on that location that they're living in. So we've hired a few temp workers, but we haven't done a ton of remote hiring.
We also believe location will be important at some point, again, being in those communities where our clients are. So we don't, this is probably isn't quite as applicable to us because we haven't amped up the increase, but when we do hire, we do look at the geo index of that location.
Yeah, I've heard some companies are sticking with what the salary would be at their HQ, and if it just happens to be in the Bay Area, they're going to go with the higher salary, even if someone is living not in Silicon Valley but Silicon Prairie. So so that is actually a selling point for someone to work at that company, because their compensation package is going to be greater and go further.
Yeah.
And Lydia, we're right smack dab. It's so funny that question came up, because those are the conversations that are happening currently. And our head of talent management is a part of a group working on looking at, do we, have a geographic differential based off of location. So we're not there yet, but that's a great question, and we're right in the middle of all of that work.
One of the other factors I've seen as part of this conversation is the increased burden of when we can see people face to face and maybe we can shake hands or hug. What's the travel costs associated to this person now that we've hired them, right? It's great that they're in Alaska, but do we want to really bring them down to Miami? It's a valid question. It's not a non-trivial amount of money if you're going to do this 3 or 4 times a year. And so part of the compensation package is, is there a travel cost associated to this person that we would want to be bringing them to HQ at some point or frequently? And how will that impact our overall cost structures?
We have another question from Sandra, who part of this we've already answered about questions that you're asking in the interviews, but she's also asking, what are your best practice on tools to use when making a final decision about a candidate, and what is the average length of the interview? Anybody want to talk about using any data-based tools to make a final decision, or is this just kind of done by committee like it always has, or somebody saying, yes, you're hired, and maybe putting their hand into the screen? And
we're using a combination of human factors and, scores and responses on things. So we want to make sure that we are always, for us, it's important that we have the human consideration, but we want to make sure we have the right stakeholders included at the right points, and combine that with some of the data-driven information that we have. We want to look at that whole 360-degree view of the candidate, not just one. Matt, I think you were chiming in as well.
Yeah, there's 2 parts to that question. I think, the first part, the length of the interview, I think that will really determine, based off of the level. Certainly I challenge hiring managers all the time. If I don't think it's, it's conducive to a good candidate experience, I'll challenge, the amount of people that are involved in the process. But it is their business. And in the end, they own that. As far as, gathering feedback, and you get to be careful with, taking notes and how long do you hold those, for. One of the things that we use, what we leverage is our applicant tracking system. Through ADP, we use recruitment management. We can send out, feedback forms. And the good thing about that is it houses it for us, but allows us to collect it, consolidate it, and then we can present that to the hiring manager to help them make educated decisions.
Yeah, and I'll just
on length of interview.
I'll just add, in academic healthcare, it's a search committee. So we use, a multitude of human factor and then evaluation tools. But it's not just, it typically, and to Matt's point, depending on the level of the position, depends on the level of and the length of the interview process. So, we use tools, we use human, the human feedback factor, and it depends on the level.
Crisscrossing a bit here, we talked about total compensation being location-based and what that might look like. And Rajiv wants to know, do you think remote work will be here to stay? And do you think companies risk losing talent if they don't sustain it? You can all have a go at this one, so jump in.
I personally, I know what you mentioned, that the data might not be showing it right now, that it's here to stay. I think there are varying opinions internally within my organization whether or not it's here to stay. I think it's a good hurricane mitigation plan for down here in South Florida to have people in other areas throughout the country. But I think as long as you have a good way to measure performance, and you have a good understanding of the expectations of that role, I think the roles can be performed remotely. I do think a lot of people do enjoy, they would prefer working remotely and in the office a couple of days a week, because I've gotten that request a ton, and it's unfortunately something that I can't approve with 400 plus people in HQ, but I think it's here to stay.
I do think that. Oh,
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I do think that remote work is here to stay in some fashion, and I do think it's going. Organizations will look at it on a case-by-case basis, so position by position. And I do think that there will be certain variations of remote work, to Zach's point. So there may be a partial requirement to be physically present, and then an opportunity to work remotely. And I do think, it provides more work-life balance. What we have done, we do an engagement pulse quarterly. And so we have added additional questions just to assess how people are feeling about working remotely, just to see what the climate is. And we're doing those assessments of our employee population. So I'm sure as we're looking at, our distributed work strategy, we're going to engage, we're going to look at, those surveys and results, and just, that will be a data point in regards to our decision making.
I do think that companies are going to find that some of their metrics that they've used to evaluate success previously may fall more in the activity bucket and less in the results bucket, and they'll need to make some shifts to support remote work. But I also agree with Zach and Janelle that we are going to see more and more hot desks, so partial work from homes. So people are in a few days a week, they're out the other days. But I think the other thing that this has really brought to light is childcare, and how important childcare is as part of our employees' whole life. I think as organizations, we've sort of tended to ignore that portion, like, oh, that's your employee's problem, good luck. And this school situation has really brought it to the forefront. And I think we're going to see more changes there.
I think what will be interesting in this whole remote work world that we're in right now is how will that impact real estate? And will we see more organizations reduce their real estate space, because there's a cost associated with that? And will you see more collaborative working spaces where people will check in to a conference center or something of that nature, and not have a defined office or cubicle, et cetera. So I do think that that will also factor into a lot of the organizations that are contemplating if they're going to continue with this remote work strategy, or if they're going to bring people back, in the coming year.
Well, and I also have to believe that the availability of maybe even that, collaboration spaces or hot desks is a selling point especially for younger workers who may be living with roommates that they do not want to be around 24/7 and need to have someplace else to go. So as part of the whole candidate experience and compensation package, I think that could be a selling point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think, flexibility is great, but we'll have some people that really want and need, as Zach said, to spend a couple of days in the office and a couple of days at home.
I think it's interesting in that Silicon Valley area as well, that we were talking about the employee value proposition earlier. I know that a big piece of that culture is having the lunches for the associates, or having the on-site gym. And then potentially if people are using co-working spaces, or even with HQs now, if they have the childcare available to them, is that an additional piece of their employee value proposition that's driving a certain type of culture that they're really there for the employees? So I don't know if that would impact the remote environment, or there would just be a different approach to that.
We've seen a big uptick in looking at benefits a little bit differently, even just in this time, right? We've introduced something to allow our U.S. Employees to have their children take part in some of those learning pods that are going on at learning centers. So there's a subsidized rate there, because obviously in many of the geographies we operate in, they are, not in student session. And I do think, while again, we believe that in-person will be important in some degree, and at some point in time, I do think we're just going to have to continue to be agile and nimble, and respond to these as they come up. And I think that will pair nicely with what we've seen just in general across companies of this investment in modern HR. And so what I can see this creating is just this continuous view of what is needed to support employees, because the employee experience is huge. People are used to an experience in the rest of their life that's much easier, and they're going to expect that out of the companies they work for. So that perceptual competitor experience is very important.
Well, on that note, that is our time. We're actually a minute over, so I'm going to invite Nick to come on. But before that, I want to say what a pleasure it's been to spend time with all of you and gather these valuable insights. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Thanks again to all of our wonderful speakers. It's been a great conversation. Thanks again to Appcast, and thanks to you who attended and for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co. That's FROMDAYONE.co, and you can check out more of our upcoming webinars. This coming Tuesday on October 27th, we're doing something a little different. This one is called Supporting Mothers and Babies in a Global Pandemic. And it's about how companies can collaborate with nonprofits to help create change. On Tuesday, the 29th of October, we're talking about building an anti-racist culture in the business community. And our November virtual conference is upcoming on supporting families, how employers can help workers in challenging times. The pricing available for our November conference. You can also check out, we have conference topics and titles up for December, January, February, all the way into June of next year. So check out fromday1.co for more information on our upcoming virtual conferences and our upcoming webinars as they're posted. Thanks again to everyone for attending, and be well.